It's Deconverted Man, and it is time to answer the question, does God exist? Agape Apologetics, a new and upcoming YouTuber with somewhat professional looking thumbnails. Yeah, these look pretty darn good. You know? They've got a bunch of videos already. Well, some of them are kind of old. 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 1 month ago, 2 weeks ago, 4 days ago. So they uploaded and then they went away for a while and then they came back, I guess. But okay, that's fine. That happens. They got busy with stuff. Had to take a break from trying to prove God, and now they're back. Anyways, so we're gonna look at this. It's gonna be bad arguments, of course, but we're gonna look at it anyways. But at least it's really fast. So here we go.
Today we're going to look at 4 arguments that are commonly given to show that it is reasonable to believe that God exists. These arguments are the Kalam cosmological argument, the moral argument, the teleological argument, and the ontological argument. The word cosmos means universe, and the Kalam cosmological argument says that everything that begins to exist.
Okay, so I've covered this one. I have a video called KCA where I cover this. So this commits the fallacy of parts in the whole, compositional fallacy. Okay, you assume things about the whole because of the parts. You don't need more than one fallacy, so you're done. And also, too, we don't know if the universe beginning to exist isn't how science puts that. This is a huge assumption being made, and so that doesn't follow. And so yeah, you're done. So we got more than one fallacy. We only needed one. All right.
Exist has a cause.
The
universe began to exist. Therefore,
wrong.
The universe had a
cause. And also, of course, your work's still cut out for you because none of that still doesn't prove God. So this argument by itself was never intended to prove God. You need more arguments for that. So, it's
cause. Universal human experience shows us that everything that begins to exist has a cause.
Maybe, but maybe not, and what we observe doesn't necessarily apply to everything. So even if it's the case that we all observe X, that doesn't make that true universally. It makes it true locally. We can't say things about things we have not yet observed. We have not observed the entire universe. We've observed a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the universe, less than 0.0001%, whatever the thing is. It's like a tiny sliver. So we have no idea. Beginning to exist is vague. What do you mean by begin to exist? Because the atoms and molecules that make up my body probably have existed for millenniums, well, long time, multiple millions of years, so when did I begin to exist? What does that mean? Like, even when you go with something simple like a table, okay, well, it's a tree. All right, you get a tree, you cut it down, okay, get rid of its its branches, you get rid of the bark. You cut it in. You make it. You cut it into planks. You cut a couple of them into a different shape. So you got some. Then you assemble that all together, and you have a table. But when did it begin to exist as a table? It's not really something you can answer because the language is vague, and so when did it begin to exist as a table? Oh, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter because it had a cause. All right, yeah. But then you're going to have, of course, special pleading required because God is asserted to not need a cause. Why? Just because it is. It's It's the thing that doesn't need a cause. Okay, why? Because that's how it is. Yeah, all right.
We don't see things popping into existence out of nothing, after all.
Yeah, but we don't have a nothing. That's the problem. There isn't a nothing to observe stuff coming from. There is nowhere that you could look where there is nothing. In inside of on Earth here, you look and you go, well, in front of me appears to be nothing. Well, no, you're looking at air. Air's got stuff in it. So, okay, well, a vacuum chamber, maybe that. No, there's particles bouncing around in there. Yeah, you have to work really hard to get to where you would have a nothing. I'm not sure that you could do that, but I don't think that you have or that anyone has. So we don't have a nothing to observe in the first place. Therefore, we can make no statements about it. But it doesn't matter because nobody claims that stuff came from nothing except for the theists. They're the ones that actually claim that God made the universe from nothing. Okay, how does that work? How come God is able to do that? No explanation is ever offered for that.
Nothing, which is literally no thing, does not have anything with which to create something out of. Additionally,
Yeah, but again, if you so what? That's a rule that you're applying. You're saying that, well, you have to have something to create stuff from. Well, that's a rule. If you have a rule, then you don't have nothing anymore. You now have a rule. So which is it? Is it actually nothing? In which case there are no rules, which means yes, you can get something from it because there's no rule. So yes, you could. Or is it, oh, I have a rule, so it's not really nothing? Which is it? You got to pick one.
both science, such as evidence for the Big Bang, and philosophy, such as the impossibility of transgressing through an actual infinite amount
Okay, so science, again, Big Bang cosmology, doesn't really have a beginning in that sense. Not something that cosmologists use that terminology. Or if they do, it's to try to communicate a very complicated idea. Infinity. We cross infinity all the time. All the time. And it's incomprehensible to me how the apologist is fine with their God existing for an infinite amount of duration, but not anything else. Again, special pleading required for God. Uh, if you the every step you take can be cut in half, uh, and you could cut that in half again and again and again and infinitely so. So, an inch, a milli-inch, a you could keep going indefinitely. So as I take a step, I am indeed crossing infinity. 1, 2, oh, I just counted past infinity because in between 1 and 2 there are fractions, an infinite amount of fractions. So I've already traversed infinity again. Now you might say, well, that's not a true infinity. A true infinity is impossible. How do you know that? It's just asserting it. In philosophy, in what philosophy per se? In the philosophy that you agree with? Sure, people have said this, but in philosophy that you don't agree with, it said infinity is perfectly rational and logical, and there's no reason to discount it. So you're just choosing what philosophy you want, and that's not a methodology.
of time, show the second premise of this argument to be true, that the
Wrong.
universe had a beginning.
Nope,
Since premise 1 and premise 2 are true statements, and
they're
this
not.
argument doesn't break any rules of logic,
Yes, it absolutely it commits logical fallacies, breaks laws of logic. Man, I wish you knew what logic was. That'd be great. But I don't know that you do. Do apologists just memorize these broken arguments and recycle them? Because I mean, I looked at the channel, I didn't notice that it was like, 2 years, 1 year ago. I thought, oh, this is a new channel. It's been around a while, so they're re-uploading or starting to upload stuff again, or I don't know what's going on with it, But obviously they're making an effort of some sort to get noticed, an effort to perhaps make this into a career or something. I don't know. Hey, no problem. No, nothing wrong with that. But did you, the person that's uploading this, what your name is? No, no. Why would they? I don't know who I'm talking to. Great. Wait, maybe this is. Oh, Melody. Okay, great. Yeah, that's a musical name. I like that. Melody. All right, so Melody here, did she bother to research the arguments at all? Or did she just memorize them and go, oh, yeah, that sounds good. I'm going to do a channel about that? Like, I just want to know, seriously, Melody, if you're watching this, if you're listening to my words, did you bother to look at these arguments and see what the responses are to them that already exist on YouTube and other places before deciding to spend any time or energy on your channel? Have any of these arguments ever convinced anybody at all that Christianity is true, or that even a God exists? Have any of these arguments actually been demonstrated to work ever? Did you do any research to find out if any of that's the case, or did you just memorize the arguments and make videos about them without any further effort on your part? I just really am genuinely curious. But anyways, yeah, same old stuff. Nothing new added to the conversation, but at least I guess the best we can do is point out the fallacies again, even though I've done that before.
That means that the conclusion is also true. The universe began to exist and was caused to exist by something that is the first cause of everything else.
That doesn't follow because, again, parts of the whole, compositional fallacy. The parts of the universe that you can observe that seem to have cause and effect do not mean that the entire universe obeys the same way. Secondly, no, Big Bang cosmology doesn't have a beginning in the traditional sense of that word. We don't really know. T1 point before that, we don't know. There isn't time. So begin is kind of wonky there because time isn't a thing. So we kind of run out of words to use at this point, and we go, well, it wasn't, and then it was. It's like, well, but there wasn't a time when it wasn't, so it always was. Well, but no, it's not always existed, right? There was a time when it didn't exist. No, because when it didn't exist, there wasn't any time. So there wasn't a time when it didn't exist. Well, that's a beginning, right? Kind of. I don't know. So, and of course, the first cause thing and all this that requires numerous magical pleading. Okay, so God is somehow exempt from the rules. Why? How? How does that function? But God itself also is under cause and effect. It too has causes inside of itself that it needs to have in order to produce effects. If it works like anything else does, which maybe it doesn't because, I don't know, you haven't explained how you know anything about God. This argument makes huge leaps of assumptions, and you're not even on the argument anymore. You're now on to a different argument which has no syllogism,
which is God. The second argument for God's existence that we're going to look at is the moral argument. The moral argument says if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists.
All right, so there's no association, causation, linkage proven between a God and objective moral values, so one is not necessarily true. You would need a whole separate argument to establish that God is required for objective moral values. Two is the bald assertion. So that's it. We need another argument for that. And the conclusion doesn't follow. So we've got two fallacies. We're done. That's it. This is at least a hypothetical, but it's not framed as it should be. It should say if on, but anyways, it's broken. Um, let's see. Cosmology is study. Cosmogony is the study of the origin. Oh, cosmogony. Interesting. Okay, cool. I did. Yeah, that's a hard word to say. Cosmogony. Yeah, the origin of the universe. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, and I've listened to scientists talk about this and say stuff, and it seems like we still don't really know, and that's cool. And this philosophical argument that's completely broken in terms of logic is broken because we don't actually know. Anyway, so now we're on the moral argument, which, like I said, association causation. You need to prove that. So one doesn't no. One hasn't you failed on one. Two, bald assertion. Fail on that. Okay, then you've got a non sequitur. So this fails.
This argument is saying that good and evil are real objective standards for the world, but that objective standard only is objective if it's grounded in God's nature. If morality is not grounded in God's nature, then we have no objective basis for our morality.
Is it moral because God made it moral? In which case God is using its subjective whims? Or is it moral on its own, which means you don't need God? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a classical thing that's never been fixed. Oh, well, whatever. We're just going to ignore that. Yeah, it's fine.
In that case, morality is just a subjective matter of opinion, not an
Yep.
objective standard that everyone should obey.
Right. Morality is a matter of subjectivity to some degree. So, yeah, that's true. So this argument can't be right then. If even one moral is subjective, that means the argument's wrong. One moral is subjective, the argument's wrong. Because it's got to be an all or none, right? That's the other problem with this argument is that if you have any moral that is subjective, then you're done. And of course, then you have to ask, well, what morals exactly do you think are objective, and how do you determine that, and what does that mean? What's that list? So we don't have that. So this argument's broken.
Some will point out that atheists and agnostics can be good, even though they don't believe in God, which I would agree with. And I would even say that sometimes atheists and agnostics behave in morally better ways than people do who do believe in God.
Yeah, that's actually extraordinarily true. Broadly speaking, atheists do seem to behave more morally than many theists do. Accounting for differentiation of population, you'd still be hard pressed to, make sense of the fact that there's far less atheists in prison than there are anybody else, as far as beliefs go. Now, there's far less atheists than there are believers, so maybe that's why. But if you account for the population differential, well, is it still the case that there's far less atheists overall? Yeah, that's homework for you to do. But yeah, why is that? Why is it that believers aren't like being nice and the non-believers are being nice? That should indicate something is going wrong with the system. That not following the system actually makes you a better person than following the system, which must mean that something is wrong with the system that you have. Hey, look, there's moral values and duties, and all the non-believers are doing that more often than the believers. Why is that? It's a very good question to ask and answer. I wonder if you've ever pondered that. Let me know, Melody. She won't. She's not going to listen to my video. Who am I kidding?
However, we are not asking if you can be good without believing in God. We're asking if there can be an objective standard of goodness if God does not exist.
Yes, there can be. You set the objective standard as good based upon your ethical system, which the selection of that is ultimately going to be subjective, even if you pick DCT, Divine Command Theory. Your selection of what ethical system is going to be based on your own personal preferences to some degree and the culture that you've been brought up in. I picked utilitarianism just because it's easy to remember. I remember how it works, so it's simple for me. Is it perfect? No, it's far from it. And other ethical systems exist, and I looked at them, but I haven't, I don't know them offhand. I haven't memorized offhand or whatever, you know. But yeah, they exist. So you go, okay, the standard is X. Okay, whatever that is, and then you say that's the goal, and then you map it towards that goal. Are you going to get there every time? No, of course not. You're imperfect. You don't have perfect information. You're going to make mistakes, but you do the best you can with the information you have. So, in my case, the goal is to reduce harm to as many things that can have harm caused on them as possible, and to increase well-being to as many things as possible. So, as little harm as possible, as much good or benefits as possible. So, the least harm to the least amount, and the most good to the most amount, however you want to put that. That's a metric that can be that's set, and then you have a standard that follows it. And you say, well, what do you mean by good? Benefits health and well-being, both mental and physical health. And we know what benefits mental and physical health for most creatures. So that's easily mapped then. It is objective because I said, that's the object that I want. Now I'm going to follow it. The selection of it is always subjective. There's no getting around that.
We're saying that the existence of objective moral values only makes sense if there is an objective
Only
standard
makes
in which to
sense.
ground these
Yes,
values.
let's appeal to personal incredulity. Only makes sense if this is true.
Which is God. The third argument for the existence of God that we're going to look at is the teleological argument.
Oh, God.
This argument comes from the Greek word telos, which means end or purpose. This argument is saying that the existence of fine tuning in the universe is evidence of an intelligent purpose for the universe.
Yeah, well, this is ass backwards thinking. It's putting the cart before the horse. Okay, the so-called fine tuning isn't a thing in the way that you think it is. It really isn't. Okay, what we've observed is that there's certain things that are within a range of spectra that if it was different, then things would be very different. Now we don't know what that would be like. We only know what is. So the radiometric decay of things, for example, is set at a certain thing, mathematically speaking. And they say, well, that's between this and this, that's the variance. It can't go below this, it can't go be above that, because that's how reality is. And if it did, well, then it wouldn't work. At least not the way that we know, or we don't know what would happen. And that's the thing, is we don't know. It would just be very different. Now, there's some ideas of uh, gravitational forces, electromagnetic decay, things like this, that if that was vastly different, that perhaps atoms couldn't even form, that molecules couldn't even exist if things were that different. That might be the case, in which case there would not be a universe at all. So that universe wouldn't be. And if you have a universe that isn't, then you're not going to have anything to observe that universe ever. It's very simple. So you have a universe where things are within certain degrees of of able to do X, Y, and Z. Carbon is really good at grabbing other molecules. That's just how it is. That's how carbon is. There is no why to it. That's just it is. And so, because of carbon being that way, it grabs other stuff and is able to form complicated molecules from that. And then those molecules can form more complex structures and so on and so forth. And once you have an interaction going, you get some really cool effects from that. And one of the effects you get from that is what we call life. And once you have life going, then things get really crazy. And all of that is just the way that things work under the right conditions. Under the right conditions. You have a universe where we are able to exist on a planet, not anywhere else, uh, only because lots of creatures basically polluted the early Earth in a way. That's a very, very interesting way to think of it. But yeah, the early plankton that existed changed the atmosphere of the planet to be what it is. So without that, we wouldn't be here. There'd be different creatures. It wouldn't be us. I don't know what it would be. The Earth could be a lot closer or further away from the sun. We'd still have life as we know it. Maybe be slightly different. There's lots of variables you can play with, and you'd still have life. But the fact is, yeah, we're here. And to say, oh, well, that's amazing. Why is it that we're here? Must be God. It's just question begging. It's just begging the question. It's just saying, isn't it amazing that we're here? I don't know. Maybe it's, given how many planets there are in the universe, maybe it's not that amazing. Maybe life is common. We don't know. We only know of our life, which makes it actually seem like life is uncommon. So if you're saying, hey, fine tuning, that's really cool. Yeah, but why aren't we in outer space then? Like, able to exist in space. There's a lot more room out there. Why can't we just photosynthesize via the sun and not need a planet? That would be great. There's no real reason why life couldn't develop that way. It didn't in our case, but that's not to say that it couldn't somewhere else. Maybe there's life somewhere that is just grouped around a sun because the conditions were right for that life. And they're sitting there going, man, isn't this great that we're all alive around the sun? And, you know, but it doesn't prove anything. Then, of course, you have the fine tuning of God. Wouldn't God itself also have to be finely tuned to be God, which would then make God have to need a fine tuner? Like, what allows God to exist in the first place? What parameters allow for that thing to be? And you can't just say it allows itself to be because, well, unless you want more special pleading, but I guess that's fine with God. But yeah, you've got to have an explanation for how God functions, which you don't. But the fine tuning stuff is pretty much almost pseudoscientific in that you don't really understand how it actually is, what it actually means. And then to use that and go, well, that must mean God is nothing more than an appeal to ignorance. And it's like, well, I don't know how it could be this way, therefore God. And, many people pointed out Douglas Adams' quote about, the bit about the puddle. It's a great analogy. It really is. It should settle the matter once and for all. That that of course we're going to find ourselves in a universe that allows for life to be. If it was a universe that didn't allow life to be and we found ourselves in that universe, that actually would be darn good evidence of a God. Not that, well, of course life is permitted. Duh, yeah, no kidding. How does that prove God?
which can only come from an intelligent creator. Recent scientific discoveries have shown that the conditions that allow life to be possible in our universe can only occur if certain fundamental physical constants and qualities fall within a very
Yeah,
narrow
yeah,
life
yeah.
permitting range. If only one of these physical constants were off
If
just
things
slightly,
were
then life
different,
would not be possible
things
in
would
our
be different.
universe. For
Well,
example, if the
life as we know it.
gravitational force, which is measured by the gravitational constant, was changed in one part in 10 to the power of 40, then stars could not exist
Citation on that, please. I love that they do this. It's never no citation. Where does that number come from?
and neither could life. To give you an idea of just how narrow this range is, imagine if you take a tape measure and you stretch
All
it
right,
across the
I don't need to do any of that. Okay, we don't need to go into that. It's unlikely. That's all. Okay, so what? Unlikely stuff happens. That doesn't prove anything. You don't need this argument. Okay, I'll tell you why. You actually can make a better argument if you want to use unlikeliness. Just use the fact that you're still alive. That's far more unlikely. Okay? And all you have to do is some basic math. It's actually going to be, well, kind of complicated, but nonetheless, you could do it. Nobody's done it. I don't know why. But just, let's say you're in America. So you probably are, I'm assuming, but, and you go, okay, America, you say, how old am I? You're a woman, you're maybe in your 20s, early 30s, maybe, um, and you go, okay, how many women die in the U.S. per year, just that are in my age range? Like, what do they die from? And you look at that stat, you go, okay, that's the percentage of people that say heart attacks. All right. And then you add that plus, how many women your age have died from choking? You add that. Yeah, how many have died from a slip and fall? Add that. How many people have died from did you drive a vehicle lately? Add that. So you just add all that number together. There you go. That number is going to be astronomically high. The fact that I'm alive and that you're alive to listen to me say that you're alive, that breaks all the odds of everything, period. The odds against us being alive to do what we're doing right now is insanely astronomically high if you add all those percentages together. Yet, we're alive. Therefore, whatever you want to conclude. But that doesn't work, does it? Why? Well, because it doesn't mean anything. Lots of people have beaten the odds. It doesn't mean anything. But that's what this argument is doing. It's like, look at how improbable it is. It's not improbable at all. It's just, hey, look, if we change things, it would be different. Yeah. So what? That don't prove nothing.
entire known universe. Then we would mark the gravitational force on that tape measure as a particular inch mark. It would take up 1 inch of that tape measure. So then, if you change that tape measure and move it an inch either to the left or to the right,
Yeah.
then it wouldn't be possible for stars to exist or for
That analogy is bad.
life to exist. That's how narrow this range is for the gravitational constant. This need for fine tuning to these constants applies to many other constants in our universe, such as the distance of the Earth from the Sun, so that
Wrong. You can be a lot closer. Like I said, you can be as close as Venus or as far away as Mars. But still have life. It'd be different, but still have life. So that's just wrong.
we don't get too hot or too cold, the expansion rate of the universe, and the strong
The expansion rate of the universe probably doesn't affect us that much, and it's accelerating, so I'm not really sure that applies.
nuclear force of the universe. The
Yeah.
fine tuning of these physical constants in our universe point to an intelligent designer of our universe.
No, it doesn't. Not even a little. It doesn't point to anything. Does not. Just doesn't. This is just a bald assertion. You're saying, well, these constants point to. No, they don't point to anything. That's just what they are. That's it. You're assuming things about them. That's not an argument.
Which is God. The fourth argument that we're going to look at for God's existence is called the ontological argument.
Oh, God.
Now, I personally
I
find
hate
the
this one.
ontological argument to be less convincing than the other three arguments.
But it's all you've got, so you might as well say it. Why present something that you find unconvincing ever, period? Why would you do that? That makes no sense. Why include it? If you find it personally unconvincing, then don't have it. Is it just to stretch out the runtime? Just don't say it. Do the one that you think is the best.
Arguments that we've discussed, partly because it's difficult to wrap my mind around. But I think
that's good, maybe. But what have you learned informal logic? Because if you have, then you would know that these arguments are broken. So I have to assume you haven't learned informal logic.
Can be helpful for some people, so I'm going to try to explain it the best I can. The ontological argument says that it's logically possible.
Yeah. The giant pizza. This is the giant pizza argument. This doesn't work. Does not work at all because you cannot define things into existence. That's not how reality works, okay? The perfect pizza, I can, whatever that is in my mind, and it's better that it exists in reality. Therefore, the perfect pizza must exist in reality. Lo, no perfect pizza. So I guess that didn't work. Well, but the pizza is not God. This only applies to God because reasons. Whatever. The highest, greatest possible God. What does that mean? That's completely subjective, isn't it? Here's the greatest concept of God that I have. It's a God that reveals itself in a way to all of humanity that nobody could be wrong about what it is and how it works and what it wants. That's the greatest concept of God that I can think of. Therefore, that must be real. Yet, God hasn't revealed itself to all of us in a way that we can't be wrong about it or confused about what it wants, what it desires, etc. Therefore, the argument must be wrong. That's not the greatest concept of God. There must be an even greater concept of God. What's that? I don't know, because that's the greatest one that I could think of. And it relies upon the idea that existing is an attribute of things that makes things greater. It's greater to exist than not to exist. Says who? Well, all the people that exist, obviously. The people that don't exist don't really say anything about it. But what makes it greater to exist than not exist? It's just a silly, broken argument. It's nothing but bald assertion. Bald assertion, okay, it's logically possible the greatest possible being exists. No, I don't know what that means. It's logically possible. I would need that to be demonstrated. You can't just assert it. You need to demonstrate what you mean by that. What does it mean to be the greatest possible being? What does that mean? These words need to be coherent. So you can't just say it's logically possible. And then it's in some possible world that it exists. And then if that's true, then it must exist in every possible world. It doesn't follow. None of this follows. It's completely incoherent. Bald assertion, non sequitur, every single line of this. This isn't even the right. I don't know where you got this version from. It's not even a good version of this darn argument. This one's not even valid, let alone being sound. It's definitely not sound, but it's not even constructed correctly. So this one just fails on that merit too. Learn logic, then you wouldn't make this mistake. Anyways, whatever, you're just copying and pasting from some website, I guess, or some book or whatever.
Impossible world. If
Yeah,
a
yeah,
greatest
yeah.
possible being
Blah blah blah.
exists in some
Giant pizza
possible world,
exists. Yeah,
then it
yeah,
exists in every possible
yeah.
world.
The greatest possible being is lobster. There you go. Okay.
If a greatest possible being
Oh,
exists,
it's more premises, of course, because the thing's not broken enough with 3. We need more premises to make sure it's really broken. Okay, this version of the argument's even more broken then. Great, wonderful. More non sequiturs, more bald assertions. Okay.
in every possible world, then it exists in the actual world. A
Nope.
greatest possible being exists in the actual
Nope.
world.
Yeah, yeah,
If
yeah.
you can think of a greatest possible
Yeah, if you can think it, it must exist. Nope, that doesn't work. Jar Jar Binks. Well, I guess Jar Jar Binks exists now because that's the greatest possible being. It's just
being,
incoherent.
then in order for that being to actually be the greatest possible being,
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
being
yeah,
would
yeah.
have to actually
Yeah,
exist.
we know this.
If
All
that
right.
being only existed inside your mind as a concept, then that wouldn't be the greatest possible being
Why not?
because the concept in your mind would be greater if it actually existed. Also,
So, according to what metric? What metric makes it better to exist in reality outside of my head than inside of my head? What makes that greater? By what metric? How do you decide that? This thing should be given up on by now. Really, drop this one. This one just don't work ever on any level. I don't know. I guess it's all apologists have, but just let it go. Let this one die, please. It's broken. It don't work.
Also, in order to be a maximally great being, a being would have to exist in every possible world, which includes the actual world. Therefore, God must exist in the actual world. These
Nope.
are 4 arguments that show that it is reasonable to believe that God exists. Please like and subscribe for more videos that share God's love through apologetics. And remember, Jesus loves you. Today we're going
I wish you had proof that Jesus loves me, let alone anything else that you said. At least it was fast. I mean, this is a recap. She says that. This is like, I read some of the comments. Um, you know, they're gonna look at objections to these arguments in other videos. I can't wait for that. Hey, don't forget, check out mine. For sure. I give you plenty. These arguments are full of logical fallacies, and so for that reason, and that reason alone, you should be skeptical of the conclusion. But apologists, for whatever reason that I can't fathom, refuse to accept that these arguments are broken. Like, they just refuse. I've told apologists many times, learn logic. Learn informal logic. I've asked, do you know informal logic? Have you studied it? And for whatever reason, again, I don't know, they don't answer me directly. It's a yes or no question. Here, Melody, if she's listening to this, I don't know if she is or isn't. Have you studied informal logic? Have you studied formal logic? If not, perhaps you should do so. Why? Because you're using those things when you make an argument, you need to be able to know if that argument is valid and sound. Well, how are you going to do that? You're going to need to know what valid is and what sound is. How do you do that? You learn the system. It's not terribly complicated. There's some complicatedness in it. There's a lot, to learn. There's the many different informal fallacies of logic to learn as well. And here's the big thing that you will, I hope, learn when and if you learn logic. And by logic, I mean informal/formal logic. And that is that an argument, to show that it is sound, which is the only part that matters, you have to show that the premise is true. Now, you stated this is true. You said that it was true, but you did not demonstrate that it was true. You need to be able to demonstrate that the premise is true. If you cannot or will not do it, then discard that premise and come up with a different one. Reformulate the argument. Make it into one that is not one that has logical fallacies. And the only way to do that is no assumptions. Make zero assumptions about the nature of reality. Don't make assumptions about how science works because you don't know science. I don't know science. Not well enough to talk about it at any rate. I mean, I know a little bit, but I'm not an expert in any scientific anything. And just learning a little bit here and there is not going to be enough for me to really, especially dealing with cosmology, which many of these arguments rely upon. And well, then you're dealing with science. You're not even dealing with philosophy anymore. If you're dealing with science, you're going to have to learn science now. And that, you're going to have to learn about cosmology. That's a whole different thing outside of logic that you're going to have to learn. Why? Because you're going to have to check with it to see whether or not the premise is true or not. Otherwise, it might be committing any number of fallacies. How would you know? When I watch World Science Festival videos, they have various different scientists on. They talk about all sorts of things. So lately they were talking about quantum mechanics, and they're like, "Oh yeah, blah 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 blah." I'm like, words, okay. I have no idea what the hell they're talking about, but it was, I listened to some of it, and I was like, all right, I I think I kind of understand maybe one thing that they said. I'm like, yeah, okay, this is stuff. And yeah, it's complicated stuff. But when you listen to them talk about the universe, they're like, yeah, some of them have ideas and are really passionate about it, but they're like, yeah, until we publish it, and it gets tested, we don't know. And that's the thing, is we don't know. So then anything that we say in an argument, it's going to incur a fallacy because we don't know. All right. So what then? All these arguments, these classical arguments that theists have, every single one of them has been shown to have one or more multiple logical fallacies. Not just by myself, but by plenty of others out there. There's plenty of articles that you can find that list out the problems of all of these arguments. Why continue to use them? Don't object to the objections. Just accept that, hey, the argument's broken. Let's fix it. Make a new one. That would be nice. That would be novel. It'd be something interesting for me to examine. Fix the argument. Don't just try to explain why the objection doesn't apply, which is all William Lane Craig does for the Kalam. Is like, here's the pages upon pages that he's written that try to fix the broken Kalam. No, just scrap it. Make a new argument. Just make a new one. You're going to run into a problem if you did do that, which I don't know that you will. But if you did, that'd be great. Be something new and novel. Now, if you actually were disciplined enough to sit down and try to make a novel argument for God with making zero assumptions about how reality works that you don't know is true, making zero assumptions about God as well, you will quickly find that it's not possible. Can't be done. The only argument that you would be able to make is that God is a concept of the mind. It exists as an idea that we've come up with. That's it. You could make an argument for that. You won't be able to make any other arguments for God. I could be wrong, but I've never seen anyone even try. So show me I'm wrong and try. So let's see a novel argument for a change. Not going to happen, Melody. I know it. I know. But, whatever. It's my challenge. Let's see a new argument from you. Let's hear something novel. Let's see you do it without any assumptions about anything. That would be great. But before you do any of that, actually, here's some things that I would love to know. How do you know what God is? How do you know what God is? Because the argument can't get you that. You have to know what the thing is. Well, how do you know what the thing is? You believe things about it. There's things written about it. But how do you know that that's what it is? what system do you use to get to that conclusion? How does that system work? What's your methodology? How does God work? What is God? Where is God? What is it made out of? What laws does it operate under? What you know what enables God to do what it does? Whence does its power come from? How does that work? How does its mind work? Does it have a brain? How what is it? Where is it? How do you know anything about it? The typical response to these questions is no answer at all. Melody, I don't expect you to be any different than any other theist I've encountered thus far. You guys, you don't have the answers to these questions. It's not listed in your holy books. So you should be speculation. Well, but the things listed in the holy books are also speculation. If there's a God, what is it? I don't know. People have all sorts of ideas about what it is. What we need is a way to demonstrate it. That's what we don't have. So we don't have empirical evidence. We don't have a repeatable test. We don't have a valid and sound argument. And so we don't really have anything. And so because of that, we must be skeptical of the conclusion.